High Street Matters, a podcast from Bira, the British Independent Retailers Association. My name is Jeff Moody. I'm the Chief Executive. I wish I was. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Bira. I'll introduce you to Chief Executive in a moment. I've been involved in retail for 35 years now. I've been a manufacturer, a distributor, and a retailer. So I know the day-by-day kind of challenges retailer making. So I think from my point of view, I'd like to get straight into the context, which is today's episode is we're tackling the really awkward matter of cybersecurity, something that a lot of small independents think may not be affecting them. We're all more than aware of what's happened with Jaguar Land Rover and more recently M&S. And I think the harsh reality is it's not just retail giants that are being hit. It's small businesses, and increasingly they're being targeted by cyber criminals. And it won't be that it won't happen to me mentality. That's going to be far too dangerous for independent retailers. So today we're going to explore why every independent retailer, no matter how small, needs to take cybersecurity seriously. Look at the most common threats, and more crucially, what practical steps can be taken to protect your business without breaking your bank account. So today I'm joined by Andrew Goodacre, who is our CEO. He champions independent retailers all over the UK on a daily basis. We also have Melissa Minkow, who's the Director of Retail Strategy at CI&T, a retail futurist and former Senior Advisor at Gartner. She's got extensive experience in retail technology. And finally, our third guest is Andrew Maben from Kevin's Schoolwear in London, a Bira member who experienced a cyber attack firsthand, and here to share their story. I'd like to start with you first, Melissa, if possible. And for those listeners who might not be aware of your work and background, could you give us a brief introduction to your role and the work you do at CI&T, please?
Yeah, so I've now been with CI&T for 5 years this month, actually. And my role is to identify new and emerging trends and consumer insights that should contribute to the future of the retail landscape. So I'm always advising our clients and prospects on how they can look forward and make sure that we're building the best technology infrastructure to support their retail experiences and their business moving forward.
Okay. And over to you, Andrew Maben. Before we get into what actually happened with your cyber attack, can you tell us a little bit about Kevin's Schoolwear? For example, how long you've been in retail, how long you've been running the business, and how long have you been a Bira member?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me onto the show. It's a pleasure to be here to tell our story. In terms of our background, small business owned by myself and my wife Caroline. We both live locally and have done so all our lives. Our backgrounds are regular jobs in the NHS and telecommunications respectively. So personally, I do have some rudimentary awareness of IT security, but by no means am I an expert. Kevin's Schoolwear itself is a small local family-run business specializing in the sale of school uniforms. We have owned and operated Kevin's Schoolwear for 10 years together, but there is 40 years of valued history and experience sitting behind us, and it's a business where I guess the service has been generational, shall we say. Okay. We serve more than 40 state primary and high schools. We work closely with those to provide guidance and service to the many thousands of students, parents and carers we serve in the West London and Northwest Middlesex area. Our primary activity is a personal service over the counter. It's typically one-to-one, and that's supplemented with our online shop to broaden the options for our customers. We've been a member of Bira since we took over. As a small business, we are very exposed to the winds of change. So recent memory, COVID, cost of living, wars in Europe and the Middle East, all of these have ripple effect impacts on us, and we're very vulnerable. And we've looked at Bira to provide a reference point for some of those issues. And if we need support generically or specifically, For example, with business rates or insurance, we've used the facilities available to us.
Excellent. So Andrew Goodacre, when Bira members come to you and talk about cybersecurity, or you go to them, what's their typical response? Do independent retailers see this as a priority nowadays?
I think it depends very much on the individual, and that's an easy thing to say. But the reason I say that is that those businesses who may have some online presence are probably more aware of the danger than those who have limited online presence. But generally speaking, I think there is a groundswell of perception within small business owners, retail or whichever business it might be, that this kind of hacking that you referred to earlier, Jeff, the kind of disruption that the likes of Marks and Spencers have experienced recently, is really just a thing that happens to big companies and not small ones. And it's a kind of almost a head in the sand, not wanting to really face up to that harsh reality that they may be liable. And I think part of the problem is, and I know we'll probably touch on this later, and I'm sure Melissa will touch on it, is that for a lot of retailers, because they may not have a strong online presence, or because they may not have a CRM system and they don't think they keep lots of data, they don't really appreciate the data they do keep in normal day-to-day practices. Taking card transactions, you are taking data, and it's those messages I think that we need to stress when talking to our members about the fact that given the way retail's developed and electronic and digital versions have become the norm, then there's no doubt that we need to ensure that that the businesses understand their needs on cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think from our point of view, no one's trying to scare retailers. We're trying to educate them in what's out there. And I think, Melissa, it would be interesting from your research and experience in retail technology, are small independents actually being targeted by cyber criminals at the moment?
Yeah, they absolutely are, unfortunately. And in fact, small businesses are kind of their own worst enemy when it comes to this, because they're oftentimes making the assumption that they wouldn't be the target because they're collecting less data. But this is an issue that every retailer, unfortunately, is facing regardless of size. And in fact, there was some data in 2021 showing that 61% of small and medium businesses were the target of a cyber attack. So I think there's this assumption that, the large victims have all the data that these attackers would want. But like you mentioned, the reality is that every retailer is collecting data. Therefore, they're all vulnerable and of interest.
Yeah, and I think, Andrew Maben, that is, you've experienced this cyber attack firsthand. So can you just tell us what happened to Kevin's schoolwear and how it affected your business, if you could? I know it's probably traumatic, but if you just run us through how it affected you.
Well, the story happened in spring 2023. Our very busy period, being schoolwear, is the back to school period in August, September. So we feel very lucky that this happened before that. The first we knew of the issue was calls to the shop. The website's not working. Indeed, your website's in Chinese. So there's a little bit of a clue that there was something not quite right, shall we say. The initial thought was that this is a simple fault on the website. Immediate impact was on our online customer service, or rather the lack of it, and the follow-on natural impact is sales. Buying school uniform at this time of the year, away from that busy period, is usually one of a few factors. A child needs next size up, a uniform item has been lost, they're changing schools, or they're switching at this time of the year to the summer uniform. And a couple of those examples are actually quite urgent. If you've lost uniform, you'll negative points or some kind of system to penalise children, to encourage them to follow the school rules. So getting hold of lost items or replacing them very quickly is really important. So the loss of service increases customer frustration. in that they can't just order it online and away they go. They're having to wait longer. And indeed, our advice during that down period was the only option is to come into the shop, which again, for those that are working certain hours, makes it very, very difficult for them. We have a computerized tilling system, EPOS. I guess it's known in retail circles. It's hosted by a company called Eskimo, who are specialists in schoolwear. We reported this in the April. And the initial thought was there's a malfunction in the website, and they went through a routine to reboot the system and to set us back to a previous version of the database. That didn't work, and further investigation revealed that there was something malicious about what had gone on, again along the lines of what Melissa was alluding to. And this was in the form of a DDoS, which is a distributed denial of service type of attack on our website. The assessment was that this was bad luck rather than personal, and that's not to take away from what Melissa said a moment ago. These type of attacks are kind of fired out in a fairly random way, and if it lands on you, you've got the problem and you've got to deal with it. So it is really about this, taking joy, I suppose, in disrupting small businesses. We obviously had concerns about our customers not being able to interact with us in the way that they wanted to, concerns about the applications and software that was connecting to and from our website. Main concern would have been our data in our main back office, obviously links to email accounts, because there is an interaction automated on the online service through to the stuff that we do in the background. So a number of things were of high concern to us, and these were things that caused worry, not least the frustration that the customers felt.
Okay, so after that experience, I know it's painful, but what was your biggest kind of realization about cybersecurity? What was your concerns after that?
Well, I think it's fair to say, and this again just kind of follows on from what Melissa said, that I suppose in hindsight we were taking this for granted a little bit. We're too small for cyber hackers tend to want kudos, and I didn't think little old Kevin Schoolwear would provide that for them. And as we said earlier, Marks and Spencers and Land Rover might get the headlines, but we now understand that we are vulnerable to much less sophisticated attacks. So in reality, small businesses are actually in proportion more vulnerable to these sort of attacks, and that's something that I guess we've had a bit more of an appreciation of. It's a reminder of the importance of having good, appropriate IT and support, and we certainly value the support that we had from Eskimo. Again, as part of the review process, and we'll come on to some post-event stuff later. In reality, there wasn't much more we could have done. So it's kind of taking the hit on the chin and then absorbing the costs and the customer service impact as best we could.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I think, Melissa, what are the most common types of cyber threats that independent retailers like Andrew are facing at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, they're prone to the exact same kinds of attacks as large enterprises. So that can be anything from malware, which is, program or code that attacks a host account or a computer, ransomware, which is a type of malware, and that locks the user out of their systems and then forces them to kind of pay to get back in. But it also simultaneously infects that original account while doing so. I know we're all kind of familiar with what's called phishing, and that's where, you'll get an email or a notification that maybe is tempting, and it says you've won some sort of contest or kind of lures you in. You click on that, and then your computer or your system is infected. And then data breaches are obviously happening, especially for the larger retailers at the moment, and that's unauthorized access to private data. The ethos is all kind of the same, regardless of what type of hack is going on, and it's really just coming down to these perpetrators wanting the information that retailers are collecting on their customers so that they can use that for different reasons.
Okay. So, Andrew, you deal with retailers and you speak to retailers of all types every day. So what is it that stopping retailers, small independents taking cybersecurity seriously? It can't just be cost. Are there other reasons why they're not taking it so seriously?
I think we touched on that lack of belief that they will be a target, and I think Andrew Maben here is a clear example of that, and I'm sure Melissa would support the fact that I think a lot of hackers probably use small businesses as a test bed for their skills. You know, if you can get into a small business, understand their operating system and what IT support they've got, the chances are that they'll be able to use that to get into a larger business. I also think one of the biggest challenges we have in trying to educate our members is trying to dispel the fear that it's not done by a third party. A lot of our members will use third party interfaces like Shopify. They will use a card processor like Global. They will use other Amazon. They will use as a marketplace maybe, or whatever the case may be. So there's lots of interfaces that they have, and the danger is that I think they think it's someone else who's doing it for them. So Shopify do their bit of security, and I'm sure they do, but that doesn't necessarily protect the business from an attack. And I'm sure they think that Global do their bit on payments, but again, they do, but it doesn't protect the business itself from that. And until we actually get this awareness across, and it's sad to say, but these high profile cases help actually. I think when they see the damage caused to a company like Marks and Spencer's or JLR, Jaguar Land Rover in this country, and the fact that they're losing millions of pounds as a result of it, I think that's starting now to get into the conscience and asking people, or the people asking themselves, are we really secure enough? Do we really understand enough to make sure we are secure? And part of that is losing the sense that someone else is doing it for you because you're using their platform. That doesn't prevent your business from being attacked in some way.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because people will naturally think if they're using a third-party platform, then all the security is in place. But obviously, it's the interstage between you and the platform that these hackers are trying to get to. So
yeah, it is, Jeff, and I think Melissa touched on the many different forms as well. I think as soon as you talk about cybersecurity, people, because of what's happened elsewhere, they think, well, that's just hacking into data. That's closing down my website, as happened to Andrew here. Phishing emails are more and more sophisticated because of the amount of information that individuals put on social media, and businesses, we encourage you to go on social media to attract more customers. It enables those clever hackers to really spoof their emails very effectively and derive money out of people in a very, I'm going to say it's not easy, but it's a phishing scam can be very rewarding for the individuals, and we have to really remind everyone that when we talk about cybersecurity, we're not just talking about your website. We are talking about all forms of ways that people try to scam you out of your hard-earned earnings.
Yeah. So I think, Melissa, listening to Andrew there, if we were to try and get practical for a minute, for a smaller retailer with a limited budget and, to be fair, limited technical knowledge, what are the absolute essentials? What do they need to have in place now to give them some form of protection?
Strong passwords is kind of low-hanging fruit for sure. And I know as an individual, I'm kind of guilty of not doing that myself in my own personal life. So I think we all need to be a little bit more motivated when it comes to creating those passwords, myself included. Regular updates to your systems. That's an easy way to stay on top of things. Staff training as well, making sure that staff are highly aware of how sophisticated phishing attempts can be is increasingly important. Paying for the security software that you can afford. I know Andrew just mentioned, there's limited budgets, but it is definitely a worthwhile expense because it's so costly in the long run. Using secure network, so making sure you're on good, strong Wi-Fi every time, and not bringing confidential data or information across other networks that wouldn't be as reliable or trusted. And multi-factor authentication is really important as well.
Yeah, multi-factor authentication. I mean, my IT guy is making me change my passwords weekly at the moment, so I know where you're coming from. So,
There you go.
Andrew Mayhem, So after your cyber attack, what changes did you have to put in place? And for a smaller business, how manageable was it for you to do that?
Well, as part of the review after the event, the online shop was out of action for 2 weeks. There were things that the IT provider could do, and there were some things that we were advised to do. Again, things that have been covered just a moment ago. So from the Eskimo perspective, they increased something called Cloudflare, something that Melissa might be familiar with. So that is something that will help minimize future DDoS attacks. For us, a little bit of a tick box exercise in terms of reviewing passwords and other security protocols, especially as we ourselves have a backdoor access to the website. So again, we need to make sure that that was running okay and updating passwords with that in particular. Our antivirus is updated as part of the support package service provision. And there are some stepped gateways between the online provision, which references data from our database. So the website can't interact directly with our database, which keeps that meaty bit of the business from an IT perspective, a lot safer. The post-event awareness doesn't stop there because, of course, Windows 10 is about to become out of life. So we're thinking about which devices, and I think there's 2 which won't be able to transfer to Windows 11 and therefore won't be getting those security patches. So one of the costs that we're going to incur in the next month is replacement hardware to make sure that we do have Windows 11 for the hardware items that require it. But those are the steps that we've taken, and fingers crossed that we don't get hit again.
Well, hopefully. Melissa, we're seeing artificial intelligence being used everywhere in retail. I was at a conference last week with our members, and a lot of members are using various AI to start doing their emails and start looking at their data and uploading it online. So how is AI changing the whole security landscape for retailers? I take it could be a threat as well as a defense. So how is AI reacting in that security market?
Yeah, it's impacting the equation on both sides. So for hackers, it's allowing them to be much more sophisticated, create more compelling emails for phishing attempts, and more compelling or useful code to hack in the first place. And on the small business side, small businesses can be leveraging AI to rectify the holes in their security software if they choose to go with custom software. So that's a really important way that AI can be leveraged for good on behalf of small businesses, and also at a reduced cost, because it would require less labor to be implemented, and can usually be more kind of like an off-the-shelf solution that is easily customizable for each independent retailer. So AI is really advancing this landscape in many ways, for sure.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Andrew, I suppose that the question is, if not just one of our members, but any retailer came to you and said they'd been the subject of a cyber attack, what would your immediate response or advice be to them?
Do as Andrew Maven did. As Andrew Maven did, and speak to your IT support straight away, assuming there is IT support. And again, we can't guarantee that every retailer has taken the option of doing that. I think in many ways, what we should be asking, or rather insisting on our members to do, is to create some kind of crisis management document. And in a way, the obvious analogy is to say, well, if your street was closed down for access, how would you deal with that? Because that's almost like having your shop closed in many ways. If people can't get to it, it's like having your shop closed. A cyber attack is like having your business closed as well. And I think we need to get our members to think about the impact of a cyber attack. What would it do if you lost access to your website? How would you deal with it? What steps would you take? And it's really interesting. I gathered the government has announced today that they're advising businesses, large and small, to put their crisis plans on pen and paper. Because if you commit to it online, you can't access your emails or your documents. It's no good to you. So you actually have to have it back on paper. So it feels that in some ways that the old ways are the best ways, as an absolute backdrop. But that plan of action, how you deal with it, committing those steps down, because the business owner may not be present either. It could be that they're on holiday, they could be away somewhere on a buying trip, or whatever the case may be. And so the members of staff need to also know what steps to take. So that document is becoming increasingly important to have. Call it a crisis management document, cyber attack document, whatever the case may be. But there needs to be some clear steps in place that the business owner or the key member staff can follow, should they feel as if they're victim of some kind of security breach, cyber security breach.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I suppose many retailers operating online and in store, if they have a breach, then they're not going to be able to take payments even in store. So how are you going to take card payments through your EPOS system? And I suppose people don't ever think that's going to happen, but they do need a backup for it. It's a really good point.
Yeah, they probably don't think it's ever going to happen. I mean, you do get power cuts, of course, and sometimes that causes that. But it is about really going back to basics, isn't it? And making sure that people understand what they can do. I mean, as a business, we're a small business. And we have lots of staff training, as you know, Jeff. We get sent spoof mails. I myself have failed 3 of them, which is quite worrying, actually. But it's good learning in terms of that. And I think the more we can encourage businesses to engage with that type of education, the better it is for them.
Yeah, and there's a real role there, I think, for Bira as well, with some of that education. We're using this information internally. And I suppose there's a big opportunity to get this out to the wider marketplace. And
well, I totally agree. And Andrew's one of our members. I haven't met Andrew personally, but I think we absolutely need to follow up with Andrew, because Andrew's almost got the template of that crisis management. Okay, this is what I did. And maybe we could then share that with our members, because it really would be a useful resource. Because where do you start? Well, we've got a live example. And some of those steps may or may not apply to the individual, but it's a good start if Andrew is willing to help us to do that.
Okay, thank you. And I think, Melissa, we've talked about AI and powered attacks, and I think there's lots of increasing sophistication going on now in terms of mobile and social commerce risks. I mean, we know this, but what's coming next in that cyber arena? Is there any idea of what's coming down the line to us retailers?
Yeah, I mean, between mobile commerce growing among users and social commerce growing as well, and generative AI, agentic AI being leveraged by consumers for shopping, there's attack surface that is expanding. There are more channels for these hackers to be tapping into in order to achieve these goals. So that is something to be really aware of, is just with more channels and with omni-channel becoming even more omni, it's great for the consumer, but it also is a double-edged sword for the retailer and the consumer, in the sense that there is that broader horizon for these data hacks and cyber attacks to be happening, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a question of just watching this space and trying to look at as much as what's coming down the line. I think so. So finally, if I was to ask each of the panelists to give one of our listeners, give our listeners one piece of practical advice, how they could protect their business better, what would it be? So if I start with you, please, Andrew Maben, what one bit of advice would you give?
A simple one, I think. The context being, for small businesses, the costs of such attacks weigh heavily, physical pound cost. But then we need to weigh that in terms of what's the cost to mitigate versus the risk itself, and you've got to make that assessment. And I think the starting point for any small business is to have a conversation with an IT specialist in the field. Hopefully that conversation is initial and it's free. Get started, get talking, find out what you can, and then start to make appropriate decisions for your business with the risks that you then identify as part of that conversation. And I think it's as simple as that, from a starting point.
All right, thanks. And Andrew Goodacre, kind of your one bit of advice?
Sorry, I'm going to exert a privilege of using, of suggesting two.
Okay.
One is, I think they should all look at Cyber Essentials, which is a government certificate which helps people understand their level of risk and what steps can be taken. You get a certificate. That certificate, I think, will become more required from a business insurance perspective. I think insurers will look at this very carefully and expect businesses to have some kind of level at which they've achieved their knowledge and understanding. And I'll pinch an idea that Melissa mentioned earlier. Sorry, Melissa. But I think MFA, multi-factor authentication, it used to drive me mad. It used to drive me mad to wait for a code to come through, put a second bit of code in. I worry now if I'm not asked to do it
Right.
when I'm on a website. So dual factor, multi-factor authentication, absolutely crucial.
Okay, thanks. And I think, Melissa, you're our expert. What one piece of advice would you share with our listeners to just take advantage of now?
Well, I'm going to steal something back from Andrew Goodacre then, because you kind of alluded to this idea of being proactive in a previous answer of yours. And I think that's the most important thing. And Andrew Mabin kind of said the same thing as well, of you need to be thinking about this well before it happens. And I know it does seem like a really costly investment, but it is going to be far more expensive if down the line you're reacting to it rather than preparing for it in advance. And this is something we tell all of our clients, is that it should be wrapped into your data strategy. Data is probably the most important facet of your whole business. That's your connection to your customers. So with that information and with that power comes great responsibility. And that's what data security is. So I would just say any strong data strategy, which should be the foundation of your retail strategy, should incorporate a cybersecurity whole kind of division, resources, plan.
Okay, good. I mean, the one thing I would take out of all those three is not being so reactive, but more being preemptive and actually take action now rather than waiting, unfortunately, like Andrew Mabin, when it's already happened. So I think that's one thing we'll take from it. I'd like to thank Andrew Goodacre from Bira, Melissa Minkow from CI&T, and Andrew Mabin for sharing from Kevin's Schoolwear. Thank you all three for joining High Street Matters and for really sharing such valuable insights. I'd like to thank you, the audience, as well, for listening to High Street Matters. That's an original broadcast series from the Bira, which is the British Independent Retailers Association. But I would ask all of you, if you found this discussion helpful, and I sincerely hope you have, that you look at previous episodes, search online for High Street Matters, Bira, or discover more from our resources on bira.co.uk. But I think the one thing I would say, remember, when it comes to cybersecurity, it doesn't matter how small your business is, you still could be a target. And I think the other thing is, no matter how small your business is, you need to take action. We'll be back soon with some more insights to help independent retailers thrive on the high street. This was High Street Matters, and thanks for listening.